Well, welcome to the third weekly installment of the Fellowship Podcast of Fellowship Baptist Church. My name is Jamie Greening. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with the always manly, ever awesome Daryl Fishbeck.
Woohoo!
And I'm also here with Misty Grimm, the keeper of snacks and the maker of funny comments. Hi, Misty.
She brought me
Good
Mojos
morning.
today,
Yep,
so
I
she's
hit
the hero.
Mojos
She brought you
early this
Mojo.
morning.
Yep,
Yeah.
she's the hero.
Joni Wallach was supposed to be here as well today, but she is not.
Hi, Joni.
Hi, shout out to Joni.
Feel better, Joni?
Have some tea.
I have some. Before we get started with Daniel chapter 6, if you're not already there and you want to join us, we're going to read the scriptures through in a few moments as we talk about them. Just some housekeeping issues. Number one, stay safe out there, folks. We want you to be well. Stay home, practice social distancing, avoid crowds. If you're sick, you know what to do. They've been telling you that for a long time. We support all of those measures. We want to keep everyone well and keep that curve flat, bend it in the right direction. Keep in prayers all those medical personnel. In fact, I would encourage all of you to start your own little prayer list of everyone you know in the medical field and pray for them on a regular basis. I've got my little list. You should have yours too. As it pertains to church life here, there will be no Easter activities. You probably already figured that out if you didn't already. We're going to follow the governor and the presidents and the federal guidelines and not have any activities related to church life gathering until at least after April is over, and we will reevaluate at that moment. Not making any promises or any commitments beyond that because we just don't know and nobody really knows. We just want you to be safe. We're going to continue to spice it up as best we can. This particular podcast has with it some extra instructions that we sent you by email, but it involves when this is closed, since this is for Palm Sunday. Perhaps you might want to have a communion service to go along with what we're doing here. That video is on YouTube. It's also posted to our website, fmf.life, to show you how to set that up at home if you want to see my really ugly mug going through that process with you as well. So here we are, Daniel 6. We want to read through it verse by verse. I'm going to read the first 5 verses and then we'll jump in. So Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. As an aside, I just like to say the word satraps. To be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the presidents and the satraps fought to find a ground for complaint against. They didn't fight, they sought. They sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Fun stuff here. How do you see Daniel in this moment? What's going down?
Well, I've always pictured this whole story, as we look at the where we're going to get to in a minute, as a young Daniel. That was the image, and as we've looked at some of our notes and talked through some of this, Daniel was not, and that changed a lot of things for me as I reread through this. I'm a visual thinker, and so anytime I read a story, I see images, and it just totally changed a lot of things for me because it changed who I imagine Daniel to be in the context of all that's going on here. So that was the first thing that really kind of.
So he's at least like in his 80s, I think. If you just take the youngest he could be when Darius becomes king, he's in his 80s, which is a different perspective, because last week, when we finished up with Daniel in the lion's den, with Daniel in the handwriting on the wall, he had been in kind of retirement. They'd put him out to pasture, so to speak, and he came in, but now here he is back in leadership again. He's got
Whether
that whole
he wants to be or not.
he's got
he
that whole
is.
Godfather
Yeah.
thing. Right when I think I'm out, they drag
Yep,
me back
drag
in
him
again.
Yeah.
Although different kind of motif. Have you ever been drugged back into ministry when you thought you were out, and here you are again? I know that's my story.
I don't know that drug for me is the word. I mean, I think sometimes, you're asked to do things that you weren't necessarily prepared for, but I don't know that ministry for me is one of those things. I have been drug into some things that I just, don't want to be in, but for me, I don't know that ministry's ever been one of them.
I don't know. My experience is for 3 years I was just writing books and stuff, and I thought I would probably never pastor again. And then the Lord's will
Yeah.
comes back around, and you don't expect it. Because you emotionally, this sounds terrible, you emotionally check out. You say,
Right.
that's not
Kinda
on my...
disconnect.
You do
almost.
disconnect.
Yeah, I get that.
And I was rusty for at least a year getting back. I wonder if Daniel had any rust, shaking that rust off at
Yeah.
all, getting back into it. So he's got this flow. The setup seems to be like, so Darius has the provinces, and he has 3 of them, and each province has 3 leaders. Is that how you guys read it? Listen, 100. No, I'm sorry. It's 120 satraps,
To be throughout the whole kingdom.
the whole kingdom, and then there's 3 presidents over the satraps. So,
So
and,
maybe overseeing 40 apiece or
Yeah.
something like one. each
and
have
Daniel's one of those key leaders. That's kind of I used the term last week. That's muckety muck. It's Darius, and then there's 3, and you're one of the 3, and he's the old guy on staff there. Kind of like Daryl's the old guy on
The old
staff
guy.
around here.
I knew that was coming.
Daniel just can't help himself. He's so successful. I like that.
That reminds me of Forrest Gump. Everything he did was just good. He didn't try. It just came natural to him, and so therefore he was
Misty just compared Daniel to Forrest
succeed.
Gump.
Me and Azariah were like peas and carrots. We were
Maybe it was a chocolate.
Chocolates.
Maybe because I like snacks. Maybe it was a chocolate.
chocolate. Oh my soul. I think that you're right. In the book of these narratives, kind of have that. Daniel and his friends, especially, just happened to be at the right place at the right time when things are going down.
Well, it says he had an excellent spirit. I just caught that when
What
you were,
does that
Well,
mean?
when you were reading that, and I was thinking, I don't think that means he was
He smelled good.
like a cheerleader and just bouncy and happy all the time. I think that there was just something about him that was steady and constant, maybe. The word integrity kept coming back to me a lot as I was reading through this. I picturing him as an older man. I just picture him as someone who's kind of like desiring simple to a certain degree, but there's just something about him that people keep returning to. What about Daniel? What about Daniel? There's obviously some integrity and some personality that keeps rising up, that people are just drawn to him.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole there's nothing to complain about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got to get this guy, but there's nothing to complain about. His work ethic is high. His moralities are high. He knows this stuff. He shows up on time. There's nothing about him that's wrong. I sure hope that when whatever story's written about my life, they could say something along that if we're going to get him in something, it's going to be, a trap.
A technicality.
It's going to be
yeah.
technicality because there's nothing immoral about his character.
Well, and I think I was trying to figure out, it doesn't look like, in this context of the world, there's always the potential for disruption and attack and war and things, but they're not in the midst of conflict. They seem to be in somewhat of a stable time, and he's putting structure to kind of hold that in place, it looks like, and bringing Daniel in. And so it's almost like people are maybe bored, and the politicians and the people are power hungry, and they're trying to negotiate for positions.
Politicians are never power hungry.
Satraps. We'll go with that.
Satraps.
And I think Daniel gets called in.
Satrap is an ancient word for Congress.
Congress, is that what it is? The trap is right there in
Yeah.
the word. And I think in that
that's
context,
good.
integrity almost breeds jealousy.
It's not a trap. It's a
a
satrap. Yeah, I think you're right. Competition. Who's better? Who's better? Who's better?
And it kind of, to get philosophical or whatever here, I think someone else's integrity can oftentimes cause us to look inward at the things we're in denial about.
Intimidation. Yeah. very
Intimidation,
intimidating.
and then,
Yes.
wait a minute, I know I'm not like this and I'm in the same position, and I don't like the way he makes me feel about myself.
Insecurities. Absolutely. Yeah.
So do people of God who are really close to the Lord pull out our insecurities?
I think they can.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
I gotta think. I have to ponder on that one.
Well, and I think as I pictured Daniel here, again, he's a slave. He's not in his home country. His whole life, like this COVID-19.
And that's going to come out later.
Right. And this whole COVID-19 thing has got everybody, our routines, our life is disrupted. I mean, his literal entire life had been disrupted. He's living in a foreign land. All of his maybe childhood dreams, if you can say they had any back then, were, I think of the African-American slaves and the things that their whole life was ruined. It was just flipped. And so trying to put myself in that position, which is hard because I can't relate to it, I sense Daniel just wanting the simplicity of life and he lives with a quiet integrity, so to speak. And I think that bothers these guys a lot. I think, like you're saying, people of integrity. It's not the Pharisees' integrity standing on the street corner, how great am I, look at me. It's the quiet one who's living it. Kind of like Jesus did. His life offended those types of people. And I don't know, I just get that vibe from Daniel here, especially, and I keep coming back to this, especially seeing him as an old man now. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what happens to Daniel. Verses 6 through 9. Then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. So what's their plan? They have a plan.
They're out to get him.
They're out to get him.
To get him. Set him up.
And so the only way you're going to get to Daniel is through Darius. Now, how do you read Darius here? Darius is an interesting character, historically, but also in this text. He's an interesting character.
I feel like Nebuchadnezzar was a little bit more proud of himself, whereas Darius seems to be, I don't know, he's making sure things are functioning. Because we see later that he really respects Daniel. He loves Daniel. And
He loves Daniel, but he didn't bother to ask Daniel before he signed this edict.
Yeah.
that's a good point. That's a good point.
If you love and respect me, there's something to be said now about this teaching on group leadership. Everyone take a look at this before we sign this thing. Maybe we should see what's in the bill
when
before we
they
sign
all
the bill.
went to Darius with this, idea, Daniel wasn't there.
Right.
So, when it says they all went to Darius, Daniel didn't even get to really speak up for himself or have anything to say for himself.
So Daniel's really beloved.
Yeah.
You see later. But when they all come to him, Darius isn't broad enough to say, someone's missing here. Who's missing here? Oh, it's the one guy this might affect. There's an interesting omission there. What fascinates me is the 30-day thing.
Yeah.
Because the ordinance is quite clear, as what I understand it. It's that for 30 days you can't pray to anyone but Darius. It doesn't mean you have to pray to Darius.
Right.
Those are two different things. It's not a command. This is where it's different than Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. When the music played, you had to drop and bow.
Yeah.
This is different. This is just you don't have to pray, but if you do pray, it's got to be to Darius. How many of us would feel perfectly comfortable saying, you know what, I can go 30 days without prayer. I can go 30 days without worship. I can go 30 days without acknowledging the Lord and say, when the time's up, I'll be fine. And we'd make that compromise. To me, there's that 30 days. That's a month.
Yeah.
That's all.
And we're seeing now what a month is. You know, before you could say, oh my goodness, you know, it just flew by, but now it's like minute by minute, literally, you know. So
Feels anxious.
depending, on the times,
So could we go, would here, maybe this is why I'm worried. I'm worried that if you told most Christ followers today, look, we're not going to take Jesus away from you, and we're not going to tell you have to bow to whatever image we put up, and we're not going to tell you even have to pray to whatever God we want you to pray, but just for the next month, you can't pray at all to Jesus. And then when it's over, you're fine. I just wonder how many Christ followers say, that's fair. I think a lot of us would say, that's fair. I can wait 30 days. It's no big deal. I don't pray that much anyway, they would say.
Yeah.
That's what worries me.
Yes.
Okay. How about verses 10 through 13? Rising action. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, this thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. All right. I am absolutely intrigued by this. You talk about the word picture, seeing things. I see the image. I see the window flung open, and the breeze is coming through, and Daniel is there in prayer. We get this glimpse of Daniel's prayer life, and it just outlines it 3 times a day, on his knees, the window open facing toward Jerusalem. Why is Jerusalem a big deal? That's his home. Where's your home? Where's home for you? Where's your heart?
Well, it's always been here in the hill country, but, you know, I grew up, spent most of my formative years in Blanco. So, I mean, Blanco was...
So where would you open your home, your window toward Blanco?
Oh, gosh. Maybe a little more east now, but, yeah.
And his face is turning red, so.
Home is where your heart
Oh, it
is.
That's right.
Misty, where's your heart?
My heart's here.
Your heart's
My
here?
heart's here. Yeah.
My heart is wherever my wife is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to
think
say, a lot of times
Yeah.
home is really more about relationships. And
Yep.
so a lot of times your hometown isn't so much the place, it's the memories from the people you spent the time with, whether it's friends or family or whatever.
So Jerusalem is Daniel's home, but he's an old man. Now, do some math with me. If he was deported age 15, that's a good guess. It has been 60, maybe 65 years since he was in Jerusalem. Where's his real home? His real home is Babylon/Persia, where he's been all his adult life. It's been a long time since he's been home, but that's still how he orients himself. All right now, guys, where's our real home, our true home?
Heaven.
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 You open your window toward heaven, where Christ is,
Yes.
right? So that's where our heart is. And so that we focus our prayers in that direction, because that's where we are citizens of another country, just like Daniel, if I may borrow Paul's language from the New Testament. We are citizens of another country. We are strangers and aliens here. So in this way, Daniel parallels our existence as strangers in a strange land. You open up that window and you pray toward heaven. 3 times a day on his knees. That's some serious prayer life. When do you think, did he pray like, every time he had to take his medicine? He's 80 years old. He's like, it's time to pop open my medicine. He's
Coffee
got
and prayer in the morning.
coffee
lunch
and
prayer.
And it says that he kneels and prays, and being that old, or an older,
easy.
I'm just thinking
Jamie's
like of
old
my
as shit.
dad. He's been a welder all his life. He's retired from that, and his legs hurt and his knees hurt, and it would be hard for him to do that 3 times a day. So
Well, and I think I brought this up the last time I was on the podcast. Is I see identity in this. Is that Daniel has a strong sense of who he really is, where his home is, and remembering who he is, because this edict is in essence written specifically for him. I mean, because you were talking about the way it was worded, I mean, they're trying to entrap Daniel, and he's smart enough to know that. And again, I see this older man who just doesn't care. It's just
well,
like,
he's not
I
being
know who I am.
he's not
and
being defiant. This is something
No.
that he's always
This
done.
is who I am,
This
and
is
they
his
know
life.
that I
It's his
know,
habit.
They
It's his
know, yeah,
practice.
yeah.
Yes.
So going back to the conspirators, the people had been watching him. They knew what his habits were,
Yep.
and they knew how to trap him.
Yep.
The satrap knew how to trap. Would they know how to trap us? I mean, I turned this upside down so much. So Daniel teaches us about prayer 3 times a day on your knees, facing toward your true home. He teaches about his prayer life. But then the habit of it, would people see that about us and know, well, if we're going to catch Daryl or Misty or Jamie, we're going to need to, catch him in this. And, of course, us around the table, but anyone in general listening to this, the same applies to you as well. If you had enemies out to get you, would they notice your habit of prayer and spiritual devotions was strong enough and how exactly to trap you in it? And then when they spring the trap, they're right there. Are they listening outside the door? Do they have cameras inside? Is there a drone flying outside the window taking pictures? Is this Minority Report? They know what's going to happen ahead of time. So somehow they catch him, and they know it. They're right there.
And they're close enough because it says they hear him.
They hear him.
So, how close are they?
He's praying out loud,
Oh, yeah.
which we take for granted that we pray silently. For most of human history, both reading and prayer was all done
But
out
he's
loud.
in the upper room, right? If he's up and they're down.
He's in his
I
home.
mean, he's, okay. I just picture, the buildings. You picture the buildings tall and him up here and them down here. And
Well, my suspicion is you're right. So imagine Daniel is one of the 3 presidents over all these 120 satraps. He's not living in a small house.
Right.
He's got the palatial veranda.
Yeah.
He's got everything going on. He's got the servants and the stuff, and he's a muckety muck. I like that word. He's a muckety muck. So let's move on. 14. We're going to read on out through the rest of the passage. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God whom you serve continually deliver you. And the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at the break of day the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all the bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So, let's move this story along. Really, in all seriousness, this is more about the king. The king has, he's feckless. That's the word I used. He's unable to. These Medes and Persians need to have a way to get rid of their laws. We had a bad idea. It should be revoked. Apparently, they can't revoke it. What do you think about powerless leadership?
Scary.
Scary. Then he's anxious. He has that whole throws Daniel in, and he goes home, and the Bible says he can't sleep. No diversions. He's not watching Netflix, right?
Yeah, I would envision no jester coming in juggling, or
he's not watching the Tiger King, you know?
Right, exactly. It's kind of brooding. He's having, what do they call it, the hour of the wolf, the middle of the night when your brain is thinking everything possible wrong that could be, and you just can't sleep.
And probably some level of guilt.
Guilt.
Now, why
I was
did I
thinking.
sign that decree?
Yeah.
What was I
Guilt,
thinking?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
he's powerless, then he's anxious, and then he's vengeful. So when the whole thing is done, he throws the people who plotted against Daniel in the lion's den. Is that excessive? A little.
I've never liked it. I don't know if it's because I heard the story as a child and I feared what if that was my dad, or something, or it throughout this whole story there just seems to be they're bound by all the words and the laws, and I don't know the culture enough to know. I just kept wanting to say, couldn't someone just say, time out, stop, let's change our mind, or let's talk about this? It was like everything was so, this is the way it had to be, and there was no other option. And
I think it shows that whatever we do, other people are going to be affected by our decisions. And if they knew that their wives and their kids and they were all, and they did it anyway, wow.
But if he was so strong about this, why couldn't he have been so strong before Daniel was thrown in? I mean, is that because he was a slave as opposed to one of their own? I don't know what the weakness it would have shown.
My guess would be that the ordinance was written such that it was binding in
Yes.
such a way, but
And he could go
outside the
back.
ordinance, the king has
Yeah.
great leeway over personal
Yeah.
property. Just the image to me, like, if I mess up at work, I may lose my job. I may have to go find, but they're not going to throw my children in the slammer, or in the lion's den. It's just, Daddy had a bad day. We all got to die now.
Well, and then Darius was mad. I think he was mad at himself. He was mad at the situation, and so he's just like, "You're all gonna die," Just
Well, I know
throw
the
them all
only
in.
thing I can think of about this is when kings usurped other kings and stuff, the tendency was to kill off the whole family line to
Yeah.
prevent anything later coming back. So I mean, maybe it was part of that. I don't know.
Well, let's turn it upside down with spirituality. Let's take it. Let's say, I'm not arguing this didn't literally happen. That's not what I'm saying. But if we just take it as a spiritual principle, so when we fail, in our lives, the consequences upon our family units and subsequent generations is real. So if you take away the lion's den and the bloodlust of Darius and just take the principle that, well, how you work and how you live in your job and in your public face will always have ramifications on your family life. You can't be hypocritical this way. That it blends in together. And if you're the kind of person that will set up an innocent man to be killed in a lion's den, then you're the kind of person who will lead your family in a bad way. Whether you're a man or a woman, you will lead your family in a bad way, and you will raise your children to be horrible people, and you are dooming them in a way that is very tangible.
And powerless. You said the powerless leadership, and that's the scary part, when you don't stand up for what you believe in, like Daniel, and stand up and do the right thing no matter what. It is scary. The consequences are scary for everybody and sad, you know.
You mentioned power. So Daniel is not the king. Darius is the king, but who really has the more power here? Daniel, because he knows who he is, his
Absolutely.
identity, he's not going to be changed.
And he
Whereas-
was the one who was seeking power probably the least of any
Right.
of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 'cause he was in retirement. He did not want this. He's like, I'm doing puzzles, and I'm playing outside, and I'm writing my memoirs.
Yeah.
You know, I doesn't want to come back into this. So we have the feckless king, the anxious king, the vengeful king, and then we finish with the praising king. Just like Nebuchadnezzar did when he has this revelation, oh, praise to the God of Daniel. Don't read that as like a conversion experience. Although we do know, from a historical perspective, the Persians were far more benevolent toward the Jewish people. They were the ones who eventually let them go back. Cyrus lets them go back and build the temple and go back and repatriate Jerusalem. So they were more benevolent, but we should not assume that Darius becomes a true follower of the one true God. He just sees the power of Daniel's God amongst the other gods, but he's not going to change his ways too much. Now, I've got 3 or 4 other things I'd like to pull out. One is that this story really is not from Daniel's perspective. He's almost like a subsidiary. It's really more Darius' story. He's the central character. And the writer of this is telling Darius' encounter with Daniel in this issue. If we take it this way, Daniel stands as an example for us of how to live in exile. How would an outsider write the story of the world in reaction to the church? Are they changed by what we do and impressed by our convictions? Or are they the satraps trying to plot our demise? Or are they both all at the same time? Discuss amongst yourselves.
I think all of the above, because it depends on the people. It depends on the specific church or group of people, because you've got some that are offensive in the way that they project their faith and declare, God told me to do this or whatever. And what I keep coming back to with Daniel is this quiet humility, this endurance, this consistency, this integrity that's steady and that's constant. And I think a lot of modern churches, we build a lot of things on events or something big or dramatic, these short, fast things that are flash in the pan type things to try and get a conversion or a crowd or something, but it doesn't invite us into a long-standing life of consistent integrity that plays out. And that's what Darius is seeing. He's seeing 80 years of a man's life who was put in a horrible situation, as opposed to an event or 3 or 4 events over the course of time. There's obviously a long story here of who Daniel is.
So we move toward, we're not shown what happens in the lion's den. Daniel just tells us, an angel showed up and spared me. I would like to have seen the story from, I want to smell the lions. I want to hear Did Daniel pet them through the night? I mean,
In my mind, he did.
Yeah, they snuggled.
Here,
I think they
kitty,
snuggled
kitty.
together.
Tiger King.
the Tiger King guy. Yeah, those people are crazy. Daniel's not one. Don't put Daniel in that category. So you get that view, and then I'm fascinated by the early Christian community and the Jewish exile community. You probably know that the book of Daniel has lots of different things going on with it. There's what you call apocryphal stories that are woven into the existing Daniel that were written. They're written in Greek, not Aramaic, and they're what was written by the exile community about Daniel, and they're different. There's extra praise material, and there's extra stories. And in that story, Daniel's in the lion's den for 6 days. He's not in the Daniel overnight. And the prophet Habakkuk comes on winged flight and feeds him a meal because he's starving to death inside the lion's den. It's a fascinating story. Daniel's in the lion's den then because he has attacked the gods of Babylon and Persia. He has struck out and literally destroyed their false gods, Baal and the dragon. And because of that offense, he's put in the lion's den. And so the early Jewish community saw Daniel as, in this way, interpreting their presence of bringing judgment upon the gods of Persia and Babylon in this way. And so that's why they're being persecuted. So that's that interpretation. Then there's the Christian interpretation. In early Christian iconography, you see the parallel between Daniel, lion's den, and this is curious coming on Easter, with Jesus and the resurrection. The imagery that they use it, so Jesus is crucified and he's put in the tomb, and early on the third day he rises from the dead, and they paint Darius here as the king who is God, who comes early in the morning and says, Daniel, are you alive? And so this is a early Christian imagery interpretation of this. But our key point is Daniel wasn't afraid of the lion's den. He knew the consequences. And to be spiritually strong, you have to master your fear.
Yeah.
You have to master the things that terrify you. And we're afraid of a lot of things. And this COVID-19 business has a lot of people afraid. They're afraid about their future. They're afraid they're not going to have enough food. They're afraid about the economy. They're afraid about their work. There's a lot of fear. But to be spiritually strong, you have to master your fear.
Well, Daniel was more afraid of being disobedient to God than he was about going into the lion's den.
Misty, you win. That's
ding, ding, ding,
he was more afraid of disappointing the Lord than he
We
was.
should all be. That should all be.
That's the positive fear
Yes.
aspects. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So we're what is the greatest fear? What are our fears as parents, as people, as Christ followers? What is it that we often will give into and say, well, that fear is greater than my trust in the Lord?
Well, ironically, I think it always pushes us to the point of reminding us of how little we really are in control. And I think, the opposite of faith isn't fear; it's control. Because when you take a leap of faith, there's still an element of fear, but you're choosing to risk that, and the element of trust has to be greater than. And sometimes suffering. We're in a state of collective suffering, so to speak, right now that's reminding us there are things we can't control. And sometimes that causes panic and anxiety, but really what it's inviting us to do is ask, am I trusting in myself and my ability to protect and prevent every possible scenario that could go wrong? Which, no, we can't do that.
Well, when we get to the end, it shows us when we get to the end of ourselves, when we get to the end of what we know how to do, when we get to the end of all of our roads that lead to nowhere. Oh, God, there you are.
And what we find there's not an angry, disappointed, it's about time God. We
Right.
find the prodigal father who's been waiting for that moment so he can say, now maybe you can discover who I really
That's
am,
right.
that I can be trusted.
Yep.
And you don't have to trust yourself.
So So Daniel, I'm fascinated by his character here in the face of fear. The Bible tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. So Daniel loved the Lord, but he also loved Darius, I think, in some strange way. This man who kept him enslaved yet elevated him. There was a love for him, and he loved the truth. So if we're going to let love overcome our fears, all the fears that we have, whether it's the current crisis we're in or the fear of death, so many people live terrified to die.
Yes.
Which I've never understood completely, because you're going to die. You might as well just adjust to that. Hopefully not today, but it's going to happen. But the fear of death, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of intimacy. There's so many things that we're afraid of. Love, so if we love God, that really helps us get across a lot of that. But also love for each other. If I love you, I'm not afraid of you. If I can learn to, and a part of loving you is seeing things the way you see them. And so often what we want to do is we want to control what you do, not see things through your eyes and how you see the world. If I can put on Misty's glasses, which by the way, they're very stylish glasses.
Thank you.
If I can put on Misty's glasses and see the world through her eyes, then I can understand where she's coming from a little more. And that's love. And so now I'm not afraid of you. Even if you're doing things I don't understand, I disagree with, I can love you because I feel that. And I think that's where the Christian community in our world right now, that's where we have to live. We're not of the world. We're not in the world in terms of our worldview, but we have to love the world. And to love it, we have to crawl inside their mind and understand why they're afraid, why they do the things, because only then can we love them. Now I'm preaching. But this is what Jesus did when he came to earth as a human being. He chose to look at the world the way we do, with hunger and coldness
Suffered with
and
us.
suffering and all the things, because he loved us. And if we're going to love incarnationally, that will cast out the fear of what's going to happen to us. That's about all I got. So you guys got anything?
Yeah, the last thought I had was, I have no comprehension of what it would feel like to genuinely be a slave, to be inflicted, to have your life uprooted in whether it's Jewish or one of the many historic groups or here in America being an African-American slave. I can't comprehend that, but I think what I see in Daniel is, I'm sure he had a lot of anger, resentment, hurt, but at some point he's continued to hold on to his faith and participated with the suffering, so to speak, and let God work with it. And I think a lot of us right now in this world are struggling with that. We're struggling to, it's not fair, it's messing my life up, my routine, my kids can't go to school or whatever, or people, worse than that, the people who've lost someone to this virus. And it's a hard place to, like Misty was saying, get to the end of yourself where you can say, I'm going to stop fighting against this suffering and this struggle, and I'm going to say, God, I'm going to sit still long enough to say, okay, God, what can you do in and through me in the midst of this? How can you use it to shape and transform me? And I think we see a life lived that way that was recognized by the people around him, that here's a guy who was a slave, and yet he is lifted up to almost one of the highest positions in this foreign land because of the way he walked through this fire, so to speak.
Yes. And he never lost his focus. That's what I think is amazing through all of this. Like you said, Daryl, he stayed the same and he was consistent and people saw that. But for Daniel, he had to keep his focus on God and he couldn't waver, because for him to compromise would be, if he did too much, he was considered compromising. If he didn't do enough because of trying to follow, these laws and rules, then it would show him prideful. So, you know, I think for him, he had to keep his focus, keep doing what he was doing, keep trusting in God. And with you know, he was thankful. He was praising the Lord, but he continued to feel that with thanksgiving also. And I think that's very important. That's something for me to, you know, I have to focus on every day is thank you, Lord, for what I have. Thank you for, you know, just continuing to be thankful in all things.
And that's a good bow tie. That's a good bow tie. So thank you for listening. I want to thank again Daryl Fishbeck, our wonderful associate pastor here of All Things Cool and Hip and Trendy, and Misty Grimm, our children's ministry assistant and keeper of snacks. Also, shout out to John Trepane. You don't see him like I'm looking at him on the front
Thank you,
row
John.
wearing his Eric Church T-shirt. He's the YouTube guru, the taker of
Social media
photographs, social
expert.
media expert extraordinaire,
Metrics master.
metrics, analytics, all things data-driven. Thanks to you for listening. If you are listening on Palm Sunday, this is when you want to go have your communion service now. You can move through that with the at-home kit, straight from your kitchen. And next week is Easter, so we'll have something special for you then. And we'll continue on as best we can. Keep the faith. Don't give in to the fear. Love one another. And learn what the Lord is teaching you right now. All right. Bye, guys.